practice. Subscribe to Vincent Valentine EX Turk channel.
What's up guys, Vincent Valentine EX Turk with another Final Fantasy video discussion. It's late at night making this, I'm sorry. Busy day, busy work day, you know how that stuff goes. Adulting is harder than you think. But you gotta do it in order to be a functional human being. So, without further ado, let's talk about two Final Fantasy games with the same kind of style and rhythm to it. And we're going to be talking about pretty much spin-offs. Well, at least one as a DLC, and the other one is a technical spin-off of already established series. And we're going to compare both games. Talk about the pros, the cons, you know, the goods, the bads, the flaws, the perfection. Either way, let's get going on. Final Fantasy VII Dirge Cerberus versus Episode Prompto. Now, both have different kind of gameplay. Episode Prompto has Metal Gear-ish, GoldenEye, 007, and 64 gameplay, and Dirge Cerberus has a mix of Devil May Cry and GoldenEye. So, without further ado, both characters use guns, of course, and there's always that one Final Fantasy character who stands out because he's the only one using a gun. Now, both have very tragic backstories, which I gotta say both. I can't really say which character was better. Except I'd have to say Vincent was more developed, you know, a little earlier than Prompto was, but that's just, then again, Prompto is much younger than Vincent, so, you know, it's really not even a fair difference, but they both have tragic stories. Prompto is the son of the evil chief scientist of Niflheim, Verstel Bethsicia, and Vincent Valentine's a product of Hojo's and Lucretia's experiments, but Lucretia to save his life, Hojo just to create another monster. So they both have tragic lives, of course, you know. Prompto grew up in the facility, and I'd have to say Prompto has more of a tragic backstory than Vincent does, because Vincent only lost the love of his life through this. He only lost the love of his life and his father, you know. Nothing, not to say it don't directly affects him. I mean, of course it's going to affect you emotionally. I mean, Vincent was engaged to Lucretia, and then the fact Lucretia had to break it off just to protect him, and she found out, and then he also found out that her experiment killed his father. Of course, it's a very tragic thing, you know. Very tragic thing, but I got to say Prompto has more of the tragic backstory based off the fact he grew up a little bit in Niflheim. I mean, not grew up, but his original origins, he was a clone. A Magitech, a perfect Magitech. He's like Sephiroth, pretty much. Or should I say more like Cloud? Because, you know, Prompto was deemed the failure. He was deemed to be, you know, not cared about. Like, this is, you know, it's totally different, but I gotta say Prompto has the worst backstory, because the fact is, you know, he was made to cause his friends pain. Vincent wasn't made to betray Avalanche, even though Vincent has worked with the Turks, and the Turks are a Shinra Federal Investigation Bureau for Shinra, pretty much. But the Turks, you know, he doesn't have to worry about being made to betray, as Prompto is made to betray the Lucians because the way he was made, and the fact that Prompto's half MT and half human. Now, I gotta say, Vincent and, you know, Prompto have that in common, that they're both monsters. Except Prompto was born a monster because of the stuff that was implanted in him as an infant. As for Vincent, you know, Vincent got killed by Hojo, the scientist in Shinra, and to save his life, Lucretia put the last final monster in Vincent to save his life. and it did. So Vincent inherited the monsters. As for Prompto was born, born. That's why he felt different about himself. So I have to say Prompto is more of a tragic story. So when it comes to tragic story, I have to say episode Prompto would win that one. Now, as for gameplay, I'm going to be quite honest, and I might get some hate for this from the Final Fantasy community or just anybody. I have to say Dirge Cerberus plays a lot more smoothly because it isn't just. Don't get me wrong, I love GoldenEye, I love Metal Gear Solid, I love the games for what they are. But with Dirge Cerberus, you get a wide range of not just guns. You also get combat, magic usage, and transformations when your health is low. As for episode Prompto, all he's got is the guns and the baton and stuff. And yes, he can still have a wide range of gameplay, but not as much as in Dirge Cerberus. With Dirge Cerberus, you got to move around a whole bunch and do a lot more than just guns, as well. But I gotta say, when it comes to difficulty, I have to say Dirge Cerberus would be more difficult because the more you change it to a higher difficulty, if you change it to higher difficulties each and every time, the game will get difficult. The game will get terribly difficult in Dirge Cerberus to the point where it feels kind of hard to beat. So I have to say Dirge Cerberus would win this round based off the fact that the combat and gameplay are simplistic. I mean, not to say episode Prompto isn't that way. Episode Prompto, anyone who just gets Call of Duty games and then switches to a Final Fantasy game, I'd recommend episode Prompto, DLC highly. But for just like beginners of any kind of Final Fantasy game that's not Final Fantasy-ish, I'd have to say Dirge Cerberus is a lot easier to grasp. You got more movesets than just gun. You can use martial arts. You could transform and do that. And you don't have to just do stealth things. You can just run up to enemies and just shoot them. Even though it don't feel realistic, it'd be easier for beginners of spin-off Final Fantasy games. In fact, if you're starting Final Fantasy games, and I'm talking about like the spin-off games, the main games, I'd recommend 7, of course. But if you're just like wanting to play a spin-off game, I'd highly recommend Dirge Cerberus just for the easy gameplay. So Dirge Cerberus would win when it comes to terms of gameplay. When it comes to story, I can't really choose. I'd have to say they both tie because both is a tragic story. Now let's get to the final part of Dirge Cerberus versus episode Prompto, the villain. I'd have to say this is where, no offense, but Square Enix has kind of pretty much reused the same tropes. Because Verstel is pretty much Hojo. Verstel is pretty much Hojo. Except for the difference, Hojo could actually get himself a woman, even though it was through lying and deceitful ways. And that Sephiroth is actually a sperm with Genova cell creation, as for Prompto being a genetic clone. But nonetheless, I'd have to say they're both equal. Now I gotta say Verstel was a little bit worse than Hojo. Yeah, everything that happened in Final Fantasy VII was Hojo's fault to every extent. But Verstel is directly involved with everything, such as the events in Kingslave, and such as the events that happened in Final Fantasy 15. As well. He and Arnon are in cahoots, even behind Emperor Aldercap. And Hojo did the same thing with President Shinra. President Shinra didn't know what everything Hojo was doing. But I'd have to say when it comes to planning, I'd have to say Verstel is 10 steps ahead of Hojo. As with Hojo, it just ended up happening as a as a chain of events. But nonetheless, I'd have to say both Hojo and Verstel are tied. The only problem with Dirge Cerberus, Hojo was not the villain. So the villain was Vice the Human, Vince's stepbrother. If you actually go watch the Dirge Cerberus online cutscenes, it would explain how Vice and Nero came to be and the deep ground and everything in more detail. But Vice, I mean, as much as I love Vice, and I love, the problem with his character was Vice only loved to fight all the time. He would only love to fight. The only reason why he agreed with Hojo because of his love for battle. So I think Vice the Human's a weak villain compared to Verstel. Verstel actually planned everything very well and stuff like that. So I take it back. I had to give Verstel as the villain rather than Vice. Now don't get me wrong, Hojo is still a villain, but he wasn't the main villain. If he was the main villain, I'm pretty sure this would be a tie, but I'd have to give it to Verstel. Now, both have really equal amount of voice acting. In fact, it was a good idea to choose Steve Blum, the guy who played Vincent Valentine in Dirge Cerberus, for Verstel's voice. So, I gotta say, voice acting is tied, too. As well, they're tied. Their voice acting is all... And then again, what can you expect from a Final Fantasy game? Their voice acting is just... It's god tier, but anyways, yeah, I still would go back to saying Verstel was a better villain because he planned everything out. He actually has real reasons to do what he did, even though he's kind of like Arden, Verstel only did what he did because he was being made fun of for stuff and he didn't like that. But Verstel had more of a character, even though as a son of a bitch that he is, than Vice did. Vice only did what he wanted to do so he could fight. So he could fight the person who had chaos, Vincent. So I had to say, since if it was Hojo being the villain and the main villain in Dirge Cerberus, then, I'd have to say tied. So, but voice acting, they're both equal. Like, I can't really talk shit on Final Fantasy voice acting. There's not one Final Fantasy game, even the 4 3D remake for the DS, that was really good. And I didn't think it would be possible to go back and refill dialogues and do it really well. But Final Fantasy voice acting, you just can't really compare one to another. You can only compare clips, but you can't really. There's no top Final Fantasy voice acting crew. They're all good. Even the simplistic stuff like Kingdom Hearts. Again, anything Square Enix does with voice acting is just, they're amazing. There's no going about, so they're both equal on that. Now, I know it's kind of unfair to compare episode Prompto since it's a 2-hour DLC, as for Dirge Cerberus is a 3-hour, full-length video game. Hence why there's more bosses in Dirge Cerberus. So, it's not really fair to compare it. But I'm going to do it just because they're both the oddballs out. And they both have Final Fantasy in their title. Now, they both don't got the biggest views because, well, Final Fantasy is not known for guns. And I understand that. But then again, you can't really, hate on DLCs or, spin-off games because that's what they are. They're different from their original counterparts. They're just alternate stuff. Just like Dirge Cerberus is part of the compilation of the final chapter of Final Fantasy VII. As for episode Prompto, is in between, chapter 10 to chapter 13 of episode, But I have to say, they're both good games. I really can't choose in this one, So I'd have to give my final verdict and say that I have to give, and I'm gonna be very biased just because I'm gonna be realistic about how I review this. So I'd have to give Dirge Cerberus as the better game, based off more memories I had with Dirge Cerberus. But episode Prompto is up there with it. So I'm gonna be very honest and try not to be hateful on this, but I'm going to have to say Dirge Cerberus would be the winner of this, so may the crystal be with you.